Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by a very special guest. She is a former Matildas and Canberra United star with two championships to her name. Now retired from the pitch, she helps tell the stories of the players on the pitch. She was part of Seven's Women's World Cup commentary team, and if you've been watching much of the A League, you've definitely heard her voice there. Her commentary and voice is headed to Paris this summer with the Nine broadcast for the Olympics. It's none other than Grace Gill. Grace, pleasure to have you on today. How are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm from, well, I'd say sunny, but it's very cold Canberra in Australia. So freezing conditions at the moment, but I'm very much looking forward to some warmer weather over in Paris in the next few weeks.
It's always really weird to think about June being cold in other areas of the world.
That's us at the moment.
When does it usually get the coldest? Like, I'm very curious to know.
Pretty much right now, right into early July. It's sort of where I'm from, at least. I'm trying to think conversion of Celsius. Yeah. It's pretty fresh at the moment. Let's say that.
Well, I hope it clears up pretty soon because cold, gloomy weather is never too fun. I was also about to say happy belated birthday, but because of the time difference between us, it's still your birthday. So it's still going on for a few more days.
It's an extended celebration. I appreciate that.
It just goes on for a few days. Did you do anything fun? Was it anything special because it came midweek?
Pretty relaxed birthday. Sort of at an age now where I like to do something pretty low key, just to catch up with the family, dinner, that type of thing. But it's been really nice. Thank you.
Sometimes keeping it low key is the way to go. And the way to go about this chat is starting to talk a little bit about your commentary. And it's almost funny that every single player turned commentator that I've heard talk about how they ended up in this field, they've always said that they never envisioned themselves becoming commentators or working on the desk in front of the microphone. Was that a similar story to you, or were you like a 10-year-old Grace at one point commentating some of the games on on the TV and said this is what you wanted to do post-retirement?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I was very much in the former that you've just mentioned there around being a player and not really thinking about going into media or broadcast or commentary. And as with many players who have turned commentators, it's come about through opportunity and just a chance to step in and do a game, whether it's through specialist comments or on a panel somewhere. That's exactly how my experience unfolded. So I was still playing at the time with Canberra United and got my first real opportunity to step into a game. I think there was sort of a late withdrawal from a game, and someone said, "Oh, you can you do this? Are you available to do this?" And I thought, well, sure. What could possibly go wrong? But it's been one of the best decisions I've made because it's really informed this part of my career now, and I'm loving it.
What do you credit that bravery of saying, yes, I want to take this opportunity? Because sometimes people shy away from taking a risk like that.
Yeah, but when I was still playing, I did a fair bit of media through sort of local media, being interested in the game and the team here in Canberra. So I did a lot of that. Excuse me. And then when I went into commentary, I was sort of comfortable, but still a little bit out of my comfort zone. So I think the sort of challenge of preparing for something in a way that you would a game as well, to be fair, around, training is like the homework, and the match review and everything that leads into a weekend's game is not dissimilar to being on the field. So it had the same sort of nervousness, excitement, energy, and then when you put on a good performance, so whether that be on the field or in commentary, there's a real level of satisfaction and fulfillment around it. So it's been a really rewarding experience so far, and obviously one that I'm really enjoying.
How would you describe your commentary style, or I guess the approach of how you want to convey the stories and the dialogue that you're talking about during a game?
Yeah, fantastic question. I do a couple of different roles at the moment. So I do both lead commentary for some of the women's game here in the A League, and
Mm.
also co-commentary or expert color, whatever you want to call it, on both the women's and men. So two pretty different roles, as well as sort of analysis on panels and that type of thing. In terms of how I describe my commentary, I think having been a player myself, I always like to be really considered in what I do and what I say. And that's not to take away from any of those in the moment things. They happen
Mhm.
naturally. But I think I know as a player, if you make a mistake or if you do the wrong thing, you know exactly what that feels like in the moment. And now as a commentator with that lens, the person who knows and feels the worst in that split second is the player. So I'm really considered. That's what I mean when I say considered, that I'm not going to pile on in that instance, but I think my job there is more to help the viewer understand why it didn't work or what could have been done better to make it work for next time. So I think those kind of educational lenses are really important to keep in mind.
So it's really interesting to see how former players commentate on the game. They almost see it differently because they've been in these positions, like you're mentioning, where a player maybe doesn't get the pass or doesn't shoot when maybe the commentators are yelling shoot. And that connects really well with the next question that I wanted to ask of, are there certain patterns or trends of or setups that you look for that perhaps other commentators who've not been on the pitch might miss, and you want to incorporate that in the commentary, and again how you describe it?
For sure. So I think, the obvious things are, to my eyes at least, are things like formation, how a team setups, movement, passing patterns. My job is to explain to the viewer sort of why these things are happening. They can see it, but to have the understanding. But I think I really keep in mind in my role is not just sort of the tactical side of things. That's there definitely, but I'm also really interested in things like the behavioural perspectives of a game. So things like body language, things like what a player does when they make a mistake, what their teammates do, the reaction, things like when a team huddles up. Yeah, what does that look like? Because from my perspective, so much of that behavioral aspect of the game is really important when it comes to mindset and mentality. So as much as I look for tactical and sort of formation and that kind of analysis, I also really enjoy looking for the more human side of commentary.
I love that because I think even sometimes in the heat of the moment, when I guess emotions rise and it's intense, fans and audience can forget for a split second that at the end of the day, whoever we're yelling at on the TV, they're human beings. And that commentary, if you mentioning that, could be the reminder of it. And that is a very important piece of the puzzle of the mindset of what's the body language. And I think that also helps when, fans are listening to the game rather than watching it, because I think that's become a medium now where people just consume the game over commentary and put the game in their head, which prompts me to ask of what does that preparation phase look like? We've always seen pictures of commentators, having 30 million pages in front of them, highlighters, very small handwriting to fit everything in. How does your preparation routine look like in terms of, is it a lot of footage watching? Do you study players? Do you study patterns? Like, how does that look for you when you wake up and you're like, right, it's game day, but I'm not on the pitch kind of
Yeah,
game day?
fair to say it's pretty thorough. I would say I spend more time preparing, researching, getting myself ready than I do at the actual game in terms of the 90 minutes of football that's played. For me, that looks like watching footage, reviewing previous games, going through both teams, obviously the things around results and their fixtures, individual players, all of their stats and all of the information about them. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I review a lot of stats. And I think, you don't rely on any one part, or at least I don't rely on any one part of all of these resources, but I use it to sort of bring together a story. And you might end up using, 30% of the work you do, but it's there in case you need it. And I think that's a really important part of my job, is doing the team and doing the players, whether it be club or country, the knowledge and respect that they deserve for the work that they put in. I want to make sure that I've done equally so, because it's my job in the moment, whether I'm working as a lead commentator or a co-commentator, that I deliver that moment, because that's the player's moment. It's not about me, but if I'm there and I've done the work, then I can hopefully produce that piece of commentary that's sort of stuck forever in time.
Any superstitions, perhaps?
No, I wouldn't say so. And I was never a hugely superstitious player. I had sort of little things that I'd do, but nothing that I had to do. And I'd say the same is of commentary. And because you've got so many different places you work, whether it's in studio, at stadium, travel, at home, abroad, if you get really stuck on superstitions, then that can quickly throw you off course.
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be too fun if you're like stuck in an elevator running late to studio and you're missing part of your routine. Any odd stories or ones that just stick out to you?
Yeah, 100 moments of panic. Definitely when there's some games where I'll do both the co-commentating role and also run down pitch side to do the halftime and post-game analysis. And when you've got a stadium that's sold out and you're trying to get in and out of, the service lifts and the good lifts that go the slowest lifts in the world, and then you're sprinting to get on air in time and a quick touch up of hair and makeup, and then suddenly you go. That's sort of the thrill of it all, though. But certainly some of the stadiums do have a few of those challenges.
So we need faster lifts and
We do, or I need to run or something. I don't know.
and you're probably doing all that in heels, which just
I mean, I can run in heels. That's rest assured.
part of the job, part of the commentary job.
Right.
But you mentioned the word deserving and giving the players the moment. And that's something that we continuously advocate for the players and in the game of better broadcasting, better commentary, better analysis, kind of giving them the moment they deserve and describing their play to the best of our abilities because that's what they deserve. Was that a frustration that you had when you were a player, and perhaps it was in the broadcasting and the commentary productions that we have today? And I guess in your job, is that something that you try to correct today and make better, knowing that you don't want to see these players go through the same frustration that you went through when you were a player?
Yeah, for sure. When I played, there was very few games broadcast in Australia. It was a time where women's football was still very much on the rise. It wasn't to where it is now. Every game now in Australia in our domestic league is available free online, and that's incredible. When I played, that wasn't the case. In terms of broadcast quality, I think we see all over the world there's still improvements to be made. Some games, some leagues have the top tier of broadcasting in a way that you can go back and watch a high definition clip with really good commentary, and some it's still developing. And I think there's a real mix of that both here in Australia and abroad. In terms of my role about how I want to almost make that right now, of course, to the best of my ability. The broadcast production quality is what it is in some cases, and we make do, but you also see some games where you think, oh, that's got to be better. There's some of the best players in the world, and they're on a camera that you can hardly see the pitch or the players or identify them. And that's really frustrating because I think these women are all over the world deserve recognition of the game that they're playing. In terms of my commentary as well around these games, of course, I want to make those moments memorable for the players. I know the work involved to what they do on field and off field, and I know how big a moment it is when they might score a goal or get a result or make a save, and I want them to be able to have that moment. It's, as I said, not so much about me and what I do. And I think sometimes the best commentators you don't notice. When you start to notice a commentator, it's not necessarily a good thing. So I think, for the players, I want to deliver on that moment to the best of my ability.
Usually after a game, when you log onto social media and people are talking about the commentator, it's usually a bunch of really, really good tweets, like incredibly positive, or sometimes unpleasant things are being said. A very unfortunate wave, and I think sad wave, of female commentators being ridiculed and really terrible things said about their talent because they're in a male dominated field. Are there some challenges that you felt like you've had to face being a female commentator in the women's game, but you've also done a lot of men's game in the Aussie League? What are the challenges around being in a male dominated space like this?
Yeah, 100%. And that's definitely been a big challenge moving into the men's game. So I've been working in the women's game for sort of many years now, and probably the only last 2 years in the men's game here in Australia. So doing co-commentary and some panel work in the A-League here. And for sure, I get those comments, I get those mentions, I get those tweets, the negative stuff, the things about being a woman's voice in the men's game. And I know that that's not, I'm not the only one who receives those things. Internationally, there's a lot of women who cop a lot of awful abuse, and it's sort of no part of that is acceptable. But I think, again, for me, and what I've had to remind myself is that comes back to the preparation you do. Like, I can't have the experience of being a player on a men's football team because that's not what I've done. But what I can talk to is the tactics, the formation, the players that are out there, their strengths, their weaknesses. And if I've prepared well, then I think the criticism in some cases is unjustified, and it's more about some more deeply rooted cultural parts that some men are still struggling to catch. But as well, like, I want to be part of that change, because I think both in the women's and men's game, having more diversity of voices is very important.
I'm not sure if there's an answer to this question, and it's kind of a big question, but how do you think we move closer to achieving that diversity where, as a women's sports community, as a community, what roles should we be taking on and doing when we hear former players wanting to become commentators or perhaps up and coming talent that want to become commentators, but they're stuck behind, they're being held back because of these very unpleasant social ideas and negative narrative that's being spread about the fact that they can't be this and this because they're just women.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think a couple of things come to mind, and first of all is to support women's voices at a grassroots level. So we need more female voices in the game from the lower leagues up. And when you first start, like anything, whether you're on the field or behind the microphone, you're going to make mistakes, and I've been guilty of that as well. And I think having the support and the encouragement to continue and not be discouraged from one or two bad games, if every commentator stopped commentating the moment they mispronounced a name or got a fact wrong, we'd have none. And the same can be said of players on the field. Every time they make a mistake, if you got rid of them the moment they didn't hit a pass, we wouldn't have football. So there's a bit of patience there in learning and education. And then I think when we get to sort of the top tier leagues across the world, and we see that negative criticism, the sexism, everything around women in the men's game. I think there's two things. One is that we need to ensure that there are a diversity of voices, both in women working on the men's game, but also having male allies in that space. Something that's been really important to me working in the A-League in Australia in the men's game is I work with some fantastic women and men. And I've had some really wonderful teachers in that space, guys who have been working in the game for years, who support me and who I can go to for feedback. And the same can be said of getting support from women. But I think when it's more often than not the male voices that are criticizing, we also need the male voices to amplify. So that's been a huge part of my journey here too.
I think male allies, when they speak, they certainly cancel out, I guess, what the other male criticism is. And it's not because their voice is more important than your female ally or female coworker, but it matches that conflict that's coming, which you need those voices. But on a more positive note, I wanted to ask if you have a favorite game that you commentated on or a favorite player that you always enjoy commentating on, that just kind of like sticks out to you when I ask you this?
It's a very hard question because I've called and worked on some really fantastic games. I think one that comes to mind pretty easily is the Matildas game against France in the World Cup, the one that went to the longest ever penalty shootout. That sticks in, I would say, nearly every Australian's mind, and perhaps a lot of people across the world, their mind as well, because to have a penalty shootout go on that long, the stadium, I can't even begin to describe the energy and electricity in those moments and the emotion behind it as well. And we've spoken a lot about it since, both the performances of Courtney Vine for the Matildas and Mackenzie Arnold in goal and all of that. But I think most Aussies would be able to say and tell you exactly where they were the moment Courtney Vine hit that last penalty. And it had this really whole-encompassing memory for the nation. And I think so many people during that tournament fell in love with the Matildas in a way that they'd never done so before and do to this day. So that's definitely one that comes to mind immediately. And I think as well, I'm also a fan of the game as much as anything else. I've had the opportunity to commentate on some of the most amazing players in the world. We've had Brazil come out to Australia and play against the Matildas, so I've commentated on Marta, and of course we've played against Canada multiple times, and I commentated on Christine Sinclair's farewell game. These moments that have really been a part of my journey in football across my career. I've got to speak and talk and celebrate these players in their prime. So they've been really, really special. And I think there's probably a few too many to count, but when I reflect on it, it's actually a really nice thing to do.
I get goosebumps whenever anybody talks about that France Australia game. Goosebumps, and I guess maybe like a moment of panic too, just because that's what I was feeling. But how do you prepare for penalty shootouts like that because it's not something that you would predict beforehand. And, it's a very high intense emotion when you're telling what is happening. And it's a very, I guess, chaotic moment.
Yeah, that's very true. So for those games in particular, I was working as the co-commentator, and I think something that's really special about commentary is letting the moment speak for itself as well. So the penalty goes in. My lead commentator, a lovely man named David Bashir, made the call, and I just let the crowd, the scenes, the noise tell the story. And it was quite a while before I came in. And I think some of the most special moments of commentary is actually the silence in between the words and knowing when to pick up and knowing when to speak, knowing when not to speak. And I don't think you can necessarily plan for that. But when you're at the stadium and everyone is just picking up off the energy and the atmosphere around there, you sort of get a real sense for it. And I don't think you can be prepared for those moments, and especially such emotional moments. But to the best of what I'm able to do is reading what's needed in that moment, and sometimes that's to say nothing at all.
Yeah, I think when the pan camera went over and you saw this Matilda celebrating, but also the fans and just like the crazy reaction of everybody, that kind of told the story within itself that nothing extra was needed to add more context to that. How's it been being part of that era now where you get to tell the stories of the Matildas and you get to narrate the rise of the Matildas and the fact that there's more eyes on them and possibly your voice than ever before?
Yeah, you're spot on. It's been really, I think emotional is probably the right word. Yes, exciting, yes, inspiring. All of those things exist as well. But I was a Matilda very briefly many years ago, so I've played a small part in this history. But there's a lot of women before me, after me, who played a lot for the national team and in conditions and with resources that weren't what they are now. And I think that's a really important point to remember and to nod to, because they've sort of paved the way for the group that is here today. And they're still working hard for exactly what they do. But to now see where it is, to see there's a real adoration of this team in Australia. And I think it's fundamentally changed their lives individually. There's I wouldn't say any of those Matildas who can walk down the street and not get recognised, whereas I'd say even 12 months ago before the World Cup, that was a reality for them. That's changed completely. Obviously, the resourcing, the funding, the support is now there, and they're getting some of the opportunities both in the sport and outside of, which slowly starting to get on par with the men's game or getting closer to that as well. So yeah, I'd say emotional, and I feel really grateful that I've been able to play a small part in the bigger story that's there.
And they're looking to podium, obviously, this summer at the Olympics, get a medal. They've missed out on a few. What are you most looking forward to for the Olympics? Your first Olympics. Didn't do it as a player, but doing it as a commentator.
Yeah, well, one thing's for sure, and that's that I was never going to make an Olympics as a player. So I've made it an Olympics as a commentator, and I'm thrilled about it. It's sort of something that I've set myself a goal for a couple of years now, to be involved in this Olympics. So I'm really looking forward to being there. I think the pinnacle of the Olympics is there's so much history shrouded in the Olympics. There's a real romanticism around the Olympics. There's in terms of like sport purists, it's sort of the top of the top, and all of that I'm looking to embrace. I'm looking to soak it up. I'm looking to try and enjoy the little moments between the big moments, because as quickly as it'll come, it'll go as well. And we hope that for the Matildas, they are able to podium and get a medal, because they've come close a few too many times. And for a few of the girls in the team who are nearing towards the latter end of their careers, I'd love to see them come away with a medal.
Much to do on the bucket list, to-do list for Paris, or that's being filled up still?
No, but I'm very happy, very open for recommendations, cafes, spots, bars, whatever's needed. I'm all ears.
I hope folks are able to drop some recommendations down for you. Grace, pleasure to have you on. Pleasure to get to speak to you. Great to see a face and a voice at the same time when I've heard a lot of your commentary. And yeah, very excited for the Olympics, and not as a player, but you're doing it as a commentator. And I think a lot of us are going to be excited to hear you tell more stories, perhaps more Matilda stories if they podium. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I've really appreciated talking to you.